You're watching Saturday Anime on the Sci-Fi Channel.
Greetings, this is Reverend Paul, and this, of course, is Studio Chojin Raw. And today, I am joined with Fan Without a Face again. How are you doing, Face?
I'm doing good, I'm doing good. Glad to finally speak with you again, Reverend.
I remember a while back, somebody sent me a viewer question asking me about Batman Returns. I had mentioned in my response I did not care for the movie, and then you responded to me letting me know that you actually really enjoyed Batman Returns.
Yes, I've always kind of had a mixed relationship when it comes to like the classic 90s Batman movies. I actually do remember growing up with some of them. For one thing, I have a memory when I was like 5 years old and my parents were watching the original Batman on TV back when they used to show it all the time. And I remember freaking out during the scene where Jack Nicholson's Joker had the bandages removed from his head and he started just cackling and everything. And that kind of freaked me out. Although, ironically enough, when it comes to those movies, Batman Returns, I'm pretty sure was the last of those movies that I actually saw.
You never watched the Schumacher Batmans?
Oh no, I did. Those were actually the first ones I saw. I actually remember seeing the trailer for Batman and Robin a couple of times on some of the old VHSs my sister and I used to watch when we were kids, and I thought, wow, that actually looks pretty cool. I admit I don't have the same kind of vitriolic hatred that people have for the Schumacher movies, but I can certainly understand why, compared to the Burton movies, people would see them as kind of like a stain on Batman's name.
I like Batman Forever better than Batman Returns. I saw Batman Returns in the theater when it came out, and it's a movie that I really liked when I was a kid. And what I've realized through the course of my life is that there are certain movies that I watch that get better. I think Conan the Barbarian is a movie that gets better every time I watch it. I think The Matrix is a movie that gets better every time I watch it. And subsequently, there are movies that get worse. And Batman Returns is one of those movies for me that got worse every time I watched it. When I was a kid, I really liked the movie. And then a little while after that, like I would watch it, and each time I watched it, you know, like it was weirder and weirder. So like I got to a point where I'm like, Jesus Christ, this movie is terrible. But I don't hate Batman Returns. I appreciate it for what it is. And there are so many Batman movies out there at this point that if you don't like one Batman movie, there's bound to be one that you're gonna like. So even though I don't think Batman Returns works as a Batman movie, that's fine because it's an interesting kind of weird like Tim Burton thing. I think in that regard it works.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because when I was a kid, I remember I would sometimes see the posters for Batman Returns, and I always used to freak out at the picture of like Danny DeVito as the Penguin, so much so that I would actually cover up my eyes with my hands if I would ever walk by them in like a video store, or sometimes when they would have a poster hanging up randomly in like a store or even in school somewhere. Looking back at it now, I actually have come to really appreciate it, and I think it's probably my favorite out of the 4 classic 90s Batman movies. I think part of it comes down to it being a Tim Burton movie, because while I wouldn't call myself a fanboy of his, I really appreciate his visual style, his set design, his art direction, his choice of music, and just an all-around, the way his movies look just sticks out to me. I'm especially a big fan of movies like Sleepy Hollow, the original Batman movie, Edward Scissorhands. I'm not going to say he's flawless. I've seen a few of his less than desirable movies. Even despite that, I do feel like with Batman Returns it really works. It is weird, I will agree with you on that one, but I kind of feel like with Batman, to an extent, that kind of is necessary because Batman is kind of weird. I mean, it's a rich guy running around in a souped-up batsuit fighting clowns, alligator men, so I feel like you kind of have to make things a little weird to really sell it, you know?
Now, the plot to Batman Returns is you have Christopher Walken, who is playing a character, an original character, I guess, a Tim Burton creation called Max Schreck, and Max Schreck wants to build a power plant, but the mayor will not let him, and then through a weird twist of fate, he comes in contact with the Penguin, who the Penguin wants to get revenge on his family for throwing him in the river, so he wants to kill all the firstborns, but Max Schreck decides this is a good opportunity to get rid of the mayor, so I'm gonna take this weird penguin guy and run him as mayor. That's basically it. And then the rest of the movie is Catwoman and Batman are there.
That is the basic summation of it, though I do think that to an extent there is a hint that Penguin did legitimately try to rediscover his human identity and reconnect with society. I feel like that he did at least try to. The problem is that due to him being isolated from it for so many years, not to mention growing up in a circus environment where he was basically mocked for his physical appearance and deformities, I think the fact that he went through all that, and plus he's almost like in his 40s, he just wasn't capable of fitting in with human society, normal society anymore, which is kind of sad. And Christopher Walken being in the movie is odd. I will agree that is just odd, but it's kind of a funny kind of odd, although I still think he's pretty interesting. Although I think Max Schreck was kind of like a stand-in for Roland Daggett.
I'm pretty sure Max Schreck was supposed to be a stand-in for Harvey Dent, who Billy D. Williams was Harvey Dent in the first movie. And for whatever reason, they changed it to Max Schreck, which I wish they would have kept it, you know, if it wasn't Billy D. Williams, at least make it Harvey Dent, because this is a good origin for Two-Face, with him getting scarred by Catwoman.
That would have worked. I do remember hearing somewhere that there was, at one point in the script, it was originally planned that Max Schreck and the Penguin would have been brothers, and part of the reason the Penguin targeted Schreck specifically was because he got to stay above the ground and basically inherit everything that Penguin was supposed to inherit but was thrown away with, which I feel like that could have been an interesting idea to explore. The only thing with Harvey Dent, though, is one of his main character traits is that he is one of the few genuinely good, pure-hearted people in Gotham, even though he's a politician and a lawyer, and so him getting into a situation where Selina Kyle as Catwoman would try to fry him with a souped-up taser. I just kind of don't know how exactly they'd be able to put Dent in a situation like that and make it feel in character and believable.
Well, you just, you know, he struggles with duality, so he would be, you know, I don't know, we'd have to rewrite the whole movie, but you'd have to come up with a plot where he's wrestling with his Two-Face persona, and towards the end of the film, he's leaning too much towards into Two-Face, and that's why Selina Kyle does it, but that's besides the point. Going back to what you were saying before about the redemption of the Penguin, this is not a Batman movie. This is a Penguin movie, or this is a weird Tim Burton movie with Batman in it. Tim Burton likes to make movies about these misunderstood, creepy weirdos. You have Edward Scissorhands, you have Ichabod Crane, you have, I guess, Pee Wee Herman to some degree. Like, you have all these weird, misunderstood characters, and you feel like that's what he's trying to do with the Penguin, because the Penguin's life pretty much bookends this movie. It begins with the Penguin being born, and it ends with the Penguin dying. And there's this callback to where in the beginning of the movie, the Penguin's parents throw him in the river, and then by the end of the movie, or the final act of the movie, after being rejected by the citizens of Gotham, jumps back into the same river. I can see what Tim Burton is trying to do, but I don't think that works, because I don't think the Penguin has any kind of redemption. He's just a bad guy. His plan from the beginning is to murder all the firstborn children, and then he gets sidetracked by Max Schreck's mayoral plot. Even then, when he's being suckered by Max Schreck, he's still using the Red Triangle Circus Gang to kill everybody. It's not like he's like, oh, I'm gonna be a good person. I'm gonna use this opportunity as mayor to be a good person and walk the straight and narrow. It's like, no, he's still a piece of shit.
I feel like part of it is that with a lot of redemption stories, usually it helps when the character is at a point in their life where they are capable of changing their mindset to an extent. We do see that sometimes with certain villains in Batman, though admittedly most of the time they end up flipping back, but in some cases it's possible. With this particular version of the Penguin, though, I don't think, at least at that point, redemption would be, at this point in the story, redemption would be possible, but there is a tragic air to him, because from the very moment he came into the world, he was rejected by his parents, by pretty much everybody. The only people who seem to show him any kind of genuine affection or loyalty are his penguins.
I get what you're saying, but he never questions what he's doing. Like, did you ever see that episode of Batman the Animated Series, Birds of a Feather, where the Penguin gets out of jail and then that socialite tricks him into going to the party because she wants to, you know, it's like a dinner for schmucks where they're gonna take him to the party to embarrass him, but he thinks they're his friends, and then he feels betrayed when he finds out they were just using him.
Yeah, I feel like with that, though, it's a little different, because the Penguin in that version is, for the most part, much more like the one from the comics, with the only exception being his design is clearly based off of the one from the movie. The Penguin in most comic book interpretations is normally portrayed as essentially just a gangster, and while that might work for a cartoon, it doesn't really work for a movie because, well, we already kind of had that with the Joker, so I feel like Burton felt like he had to change the Penguin around to make him a little more of an interesting character, and at least a little more on the memorable side, which I do think that he did succeed in that, at least in that respect, because the Penguin is pretty memorable in the movie.
I hear what you're saying, that the Penguin, you know, Burton's Penguin is a much different Penguin than comic book Penguin. But the idea is that in the Batman the Animated Series Series episode, there's an attempt at the Penguin to better himself, and then when he realized that they're fucking with him, then he has a reason to say fuck this. And at least we see him try to redeem himself, and now we understand why he goes back to his ways, and in that respect, it makes him much more sympathetic. Whereas Burton's Penguin never has that moment of self-awareness. If Max Schreck said to him, I'm gonna make you the mayor, and then he's like, okay, and then he started to like act like a mayor and dress nice and treat people nice and shake hands with people, and then when he found out Max Schreck was, you know, it was all a scam, then that would have made sense for him to have that arc. And then when the Penguins march him out, when they fucking give him that burial at sea, that ending would feel earned, because we would feel some kind of sympathy for him, but that doesn't happen. He's a shitty guy who continues to be a shitty guy who learns no fucking lessons, and it ain't fucking sad at all when he dies.
I don't know. For me, I feel like even when a villain is, for the most part, very reprehensible, if you see elements of what made them that way, you can feel at least a bit of sympathy for them. Like I said, with the Penguin, he was rejected by his parents, by society, he was probably mocked and abused for, you can only imagine, years. We never really do get an idea of like how he got out of the sewers from being raised by penguins to connecting with normal people, but you get the impression that maybe, just maybe, that if his parents hadn't turned him away, that he might have become a better person, but all those years of anger and rejection just, well, festered inside of him until eventually he just decided to lash out at everybody since he figures, no one's gonna accept me anyway, so why bother trying?
The movie doesn't paint him out to be sympathetic, regardless of whatever his internal conflict is. I don't feel like the movie telegraphs that.
I feel like Burton's kind of like George Lucas in some regards, that he's good at coming up with ideas, characters, and even storylines, but he needs someone to polish them up for him a bit in order to make them really work. It's possible that this movie might have done a little better if they had, I don't know, reined him in just a little bit, because from what I've heard about the movie itself, the main way they were able to get Burton back to make this movie was by essentially giving him free reign to do whatever the hell he wanted. I feel like if they had just taken a little more restraint, or at least tried to polish things up a little bit, it probably would have worked out a bit better.
The problem is Tim Burton doesn't understand anything about Batman. And it's not even through like lack of, because he's stupid, it's because he doesn't care. Like, he just cares about the weird, twisted, misunderstood anti-hero, and he doesn't give a shit about Batman as a character.
I don't know. I feel kind of like with that kind of argument, you could say the same thing about the Adam West show in the 60s, considering that's even further from Batman, or at least how we perceive Batman nowadays, compared to the Burton movies.
This movie is a lot like the 1966 Batman. In fact, I would argue there are certain movies that are saved by art direction. There are movies that are not good, that because they look beautiful and they have beautiful scores, people will give them a pass. I think the Wachowski Speed Racer movie is a good recent example of this, where it's a movie that is not good, but everyone wants to talk about it being better than it is because it looks so cool. And to some degree, I think you could say the same about the original Blade Runner. The reason that movie is held in as high regard as it is because it's a beautiful looking film. If Blade Runner looked like Trancers, nobody would give a shit about it. And I feel like the same thing could be said about Batman Returns, where it's a beautiful looking movie and the Elfman score is amazing. But if you were to take this and put on like a 66 Batman paint job, it would feel completely consistent.
I don't know. When it comes to capturing the feeling of Batman, I feel like that kind of becomes very difficult to do with how many different interpretations of him there are. You could make the argument that some aspects of the Nolan trilogy don't quite capture everything about Batman, considering it tries to be more grounded in realism or anything. Plus, I'm pretty sure I remember hearing something that Burton didn't originally read a Batman comic until he started working on the original Batman movie. I guess you can make of that what you will, but honestly, I still enjoy Batman Returns in spite of it. One of the reasons is the art direction. I love how the movie just has this very cold feel to it, how a lot of the most prominent colors in it are black, gray, white, and how everything is covered in ice and snow, and even the poster and the trailers shows the Batman logo covered in snow being blown away by the icy cold air. And for whatever reason, I really like that. I like the look of the Penguin's lair, even if it is essentially just a broken down Arctic exhibit in a zoo. It has this whole tragic, cold, grim air to it. I don't know why, I really enjoy that sort of thing for some reason.
I agree with you. I think the movie looks great. I think I could prove to you that this movie does not understand Batman. There is a scene in this movie where Michael Keaton as Bruce Wayne, he suspects Max Schreck is up to something. So he makes an appointment, I guess maybe with Selena Kyle, to go see Max Schreck. And then they sit in a boardroom, and then Bruce Wayne is basically saying to Max Schreck, hey, you know, I know you're up to something with this power plant. What's the deal? And Max Schreck's like, I don't need to tell you anything. And then Bruce Wayne's like, and what's the deal with Oswald Cobblepot? And then like Max Schreck is like, Bruce Wayne, like, what the fuck are you talking about? Get out of my office. The problem with that scene is Batman would never make an appointment to go to Max Schreck's office. Batman would put on his fucking Batman costume, and then he would wait till nighttime, and then he would break into Schreck's office, and then he would tell Max Schreck, you're gonna tell me what's going on with you and Cobblepot, otherwise I'm gonna bash your head into your fucking desk.
I don't know about that. Batman is more than willing to threaten corrupt individuals. He usually at least makes sure he has solid evidence before he actually does that. And I do remember there being at least a couple episodes of the original animated series where he at least did speak directly to some of the more corrupt individuals who at least had some veil of protection within the law. There's also like Batman Beyond. Remember, he knew that Derek Powers, the guy who was the, I guess you want to say, co-owner of their company in Batman Beyond, he knew that Derek Powers was corrupt, guilty, and all that other stuff, and yet he basically waited until he made sure he had evidence before he started threatening him, and even then, he didn't just let Terry go into his office, hold him up over a ledge, and say, if you don't tell me what I want to know, Powers, I'm gonna drop you off this ledge.
I feel like the problem with this movie is that there's not enough Batman in it. Batman shows up like, I don't know, like 10 minutes into the movie, and then he does an action sequence, he mumbles something to the commissioner, and then he disappears, and then it's like another 25 minutes till we see Bruce Wayne tree trimming with Alfred. By that point, we're almost 40 minutes into the movie, and it's like Batman has had 2 scenes.
I think part of it is that you have to consider the 2 personas with Batman and Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne, while he is at least in part the public persona of Batman, he's also, to an extent, at least in the movies, the brain part of him, because usually whenever we see him do any kind of detective work, it's usually as Bruce rather than Batman. Whereas when he dresses up as Batman, that's usually when he does the more physically demanding stuff, you know, getting into fights, beating up the bad guy, and all that stuff. The problem with that is that, as we saw in the first Batman movie, once Batman confronted the Joker face to face, it wasn't a fight, it was literally just watching him beat the living hell out of a 50-year-old guy in a clown suit. I think that's part of the reason they limit his screen time because, well, besides the obvious fact that I don't imagine that suit was especially comfortable for Michael Keaton to walk around in, so I imagine they tried to keep him out of it as much as possible. We know for a fact that once he gets into a fight with the Penguin, he's gonna win. We see that near the end of the climax where the Penguin doesn't really pose much of a physical threat to him. Most of Batman's villains don't. If it was like Bane or Killer Croc, it'd be a different story.
No, the Penguin cannot beat Batman hand to hand, but the Penguin has henchmen. The Penguin is supposed to have a plan that tests Batman's intelligence as well as his physical prowess. That's the problem with this movie. It's not constructed to be a Batman movie. It's just this weird Tim Burton thing that Batman is in, and it's like Selena Kyle really gets the shit end of the stick. There's this great moment during that ballroom scene where Selena Kyle's breaking down. She's talking about Max Schreck, and she's talking about, I'm gonna kill him, this is what he deserves. And there's this great idea there where you have Max Schreck, who's this crooked businessman, and then you have Selena Kyle, who in the comics is a cat burglar. And so if they were to bring that dynamic into this movie where you have Selena Kyle, who's this cat burglar, and then she hates this corrupt businessman who she feels like he doesn't deserve his wealth, there's a dynamic there that could be really cool, but it's not explored. And Catwoman is really just, I mean, you talk about Danny DeVito being a creepy weirdo, but really Catwoman in this movie only exists for guys to want to fuck her. When Bruce Wayne first meets Selena Kyle, he is completely dumbfounded by this woman. He just can't get his fucking words together. I understand why Max Schreck is dumbfounded because he thinks he killed her, but Bruce Wayne evidently has never seen a woman before, and he is gobsmacked that this chick is standing in front of him. And then, like you said, the Penguin constantly wants to fuck Catwoman. And then there's that sequence where like Batman is just letting Catwoman feel him up till she finds, whatever, the soft part of the armor to stab him. And it's like, why is Batman just letting this woman who he doesn't know touch him all over? Like, is everybody in this movie so fucking horny for Catwoman they're powerless against her affections?
Well, I mean, to be fair, part of Catwoman's character was being sort of a femme fatale, knew when to use seduction to, you know, get the drop on her opponents. That was true even in the animated series. Although, on that note, one thing I do feel I wish they had gone with was in the animated series, they made her a bit of an animal rights activist, which I actually thought was kind of a nice touch. It showed that even though she was a thief, she had an altruistic side to her, which actually made sympathizing with her and rooting for her a lot easier to do.
There was this one thing that I caught when she's listening to her answering machine messages, and that one guy calls her up and he's like, "Hey Selena, I have to cancel the vacation with you because my therapist says I need to be more of a person and not an appendage." What do you make of that?
There's a lot of things I could make of that. I think at least what he was trying to say is like an attachment to another person, maybe, in this case, an attachment to her, maybe, or maybe that was just his ham-fisted way of saying, "Selena, I know we set up a date for this weekend, but, I'm not interested in you anymore, and rather than just saying that to your face, I'm gonna make up this convoluted lie and leave it on your answering machine just to screw with you because I'm just that much of a dick." Plus, I think I remember hearing that the idea was basically just to show that the whole answering machine thing was to show how pathetic and lonely she was, and just having her boyfriend passive-aggressively dump her like that was just another way of doing it. Maybe there was some deeper meaning to it. I'm not the kind of guy who tries to overanalyze stuff and see deeper themes in every single sentence or image in a movie.
Your interpretation of this is that he's saying to her, like, she's too attached. She's clingy. No, wait, he's clingy. Wait, if he's the appendage, then he's clingy to her. He's basically saying to her, my psychiatrist is saying I'm too clingy to you, so that's why I have to cancel our trip.
I think it was more like just the attachment thing, like being attached in like a relationship sense, like saying that he shouldn't be in a relationship. I think he was just saying, my therapist is basically saying that I should be my own person, and that means not being in a relationship right now, or being attached or tied down to somebody. Or maybe he just meant, I'm dumping you, and I'm just trying to make it sound intelligent for some reason.
Okay, no, that makes a lot of sense. Let me now, like, entertain the completely bonkers nut point of view, which was, after that message plays, and then she says, she responds to it by saying some appendage. I took that to be a dick joke. I took it to mean this dude was saying, look, Selena Kyle, you just love me for the giant hog that I got, and my psychiatrist is telling me you have to stop objectifying me and I need to be more of a man. Am I crazy?
I mean,
I took it to mean as if, like, when Selena Kyle is hanging out with this dude, she is constantly staring at his crotch and just making this man feel not like a person. Like, imagine if it was a guy dating a woman with a large bust and he couldn't stop staring at her chest. This dude evidently has a giant dick and Selena Kyle cannot stop staring at it. That was the way I took it, but it could be because I'm fucking crazy.
I don't know, maybe it could just mean she was referring to him as like a tool because she thought that she would be dumb enough to believe that obvious lie.
It is funny for me rewatching this movie because when I was a little kid, the two filmmakers I really loved were Tim Burton and Steven Spielberg. And when I became a teenager, I kind of lost interest in Spielberg and I became more into Burton. But now, as I'm barreling towards middle age, I find myself re-falling in love with Steven Spielberg. Like, you know, I'll watch his films. I was just rewatching, you know, the first 3 Indiana Jones movies. And those movies are so beautifully made and I keep finding new reasons to like them. But as an adult, like rewatching Tim Burton movies, it's like, well, you know, I don't want to say Tim Burton is a shallow filmmaker because I don't think he is a shallow filmmaker, but he's a filmmaker that I find less value in the older I get.
I think the thing is that when it comes to Spielberg, his movies are, I guess you could say he has a lot more range when it comes to being a filmmaker. I'm not sure if I could say Spielberg has a certain style or aesthetic to him, but you can clearly tell he puts a lot of love and thought into every movie that he makes, but he's also more open-minded and willing to try new things. I mean, he manages to make each movie work for the most part, whereas Tim Burton, it's pretty obvious that he mainly works either through making horror movies or gothic movies or tragic movies, and oftentimes whenever he steps outside of that niche, you can tell and it kind of falls flat on its face, and even then, I feel like he tries sometimes a little too hard to insert his own style into a different movie.
Batman Returns to me feels, like tonally, it feels very in line with Edward Scissorhands. Rewatching it now, I was surprised by that.
Well, I mean, they both do tackle similar similar issues. A very unusual outcast tries to reconnect with society, but ultimately fails for one reason or another. In the case of Edward Scissorhands, it has more to do with the prejudice he experiences from other people, not to mention people judging him because of his appearance. Whereas with the Penguin, it's more to do with his own actions rather than those of others. Although I do think that it's possible that one thing that would have been nice is that the Penguin does make a genuine effort to try and be a good person, yet people can't look past his deformities and his appearance, and they're only acting nice because he's like a fad, like one of those things that people think is cool and like for a short period of time, but then after it stops being trendy, they drop it like a bad habit.
A recurring theme, like we said before, in Burton's work is the misunderstood, awkward hero or anti-hero, however you want to describe it. And I think Burton's best film, I think, is Ed Wood. And the reason I think Ed Wood works in terms of being this movie about like misfits trying to find their place in society is because those characters are humanized. They're not just creepy weirdos. We see the people that they really are, and that is the thing that is missing in Batman Returns, I think. I think there is no human element to the Penguin. You know, there's no human element to Max Schreck. Even Selina Kyle becomes kind of a mustache twirling villain towards the end. I mean, they're so one-dimensional, like there's no attempt to give them any depth, and I think Burton thinks he's doing a comic book. I think he thinks that he could have these archetypes that don't have a lot of depth because he's like, oh, it's comic books, you know, that's what they are. They're villains and they're heroes. That just to me shows he doesn't understand comic books.
I don't know, maybe. I feel like part of the issue, at least with earlier superhero movies, is that they were almost always self-contained stories, so that limited what they could really do compared to like current superhero movies where in addition to having self-contained stories, they can also plant the seeds for things to be brought up in another movie. For example, in the original Iron Man, they set up War Machine, and which is paid off in the second movie with him being there. And then there are sometimes villains who are set up in the first movie, or at the very least shown, and then they become the villain in like the next movie. I feel like maybe what Burton should have done with the Catwoman thing is introduce Selina Kyle in the movie, but the thing of her becoming Catwoman doesn't happen until like the very end of the movie. Like that scene where Catwoman is looking up at the bat signal in the sky, rather than that being like just some odd send-off to say that yes, Catwoman is live, that could be like the moment where she first appears on the screen as Catwoman, hinting that she will appear in the next movie. So that way you still have Catwoman in the movie, but her presence isn't so massive that it takes away from stuff that could be given to the Penguin to make him more interesting.
No, I agree with that. And you kind of like stumble upon a really great point there, which is that like these movies back then were so self-contained, and really that just speaks to the fact that we have to look at these movies in context, and the way they were approaching superhero movies in the 90s is very different the way they're doing it today. And so you do have to kind of grade this movie on a curve. So it's not completely fair to look at this movie with modern eyes. You do have to look at it in context.
I do feel kind of like also part of what makes it an interesting and in some cases enjoyable movie to revisit is how different it is from modern superhero movies. It has a very different feel to it compared to current comic book movies. I think in a way it feels more like a comic book movie compared to like a superhero movie like the ones we have now. Plus, I don't know how to really explain it, to be honest. I think it's partially because with the MCU movies, even though they do have certain locations to them that are kind of odd, like the Sanctum Sanctorum or the Helicarrier, most of the time the movies seem to take place in relatively normal looking cities with normal looking people with random crazy stuff happening in spare moments. Whereas when you look at Batman Returns, pretty much everything about it screams comic book. Not just Batman and the Penguin and Catwoman, but the very city itself, the gothic aesthetic, those weird statues with the levers in the front of City Hall for some weird reason that I still to this day wonder what the hell those things are meant to be or symbolize, the countless high towers and high roofs, and just the fact that the main antagonist, besides the Penguin, is an army of crazy circus performers. Besides that, just the sets, the miniatures, the costumes, the makeup effects, everything about it just screams comic book.
I agree completely with what you're saying. One of the problems I have with the MCU, and I love the MCU movies, but one of the problems I have with the MCU movies is that they all kind of look the same. They don't feel unique at all. They're kind of banal at this point because we're so used to the Marvel style. And yes, one thing you could definitely say about Batman Returns and the first Batman, and maybe even like, you know, just the the, these first 4 Batman movies, even the Schumacher movies, there's a style there. And, it's that Burton heightened reality, that German expressionism, and it looks great. Batman Returns basically sort of set the template for the animated series.
It definitely feels kind of like it takes you to a completely different world that feels completely separate from ours, whereas the MCU movies, for the most part, feel kind of like it could be our world, but with some bells and whistles attached to it. Now, in more recent years, they've all basically just become the same kind of story, same basic setup and everything, and it just kind of falls flat for me.
Obviously, Tim Burton worked with Michael Keaton in Beetlejuice, and it just occurred to me that the Penguin in Batman Returns is pretty much just Beetlejuice. He's just this creepy perv who's trying to get laid all the time.
Yeah, though at least in the case of the Penguin, he does try to tone it down when he's in public, whereas Beetlejuice basically is like, I'm the ghost with a moose and I don't care how many people I offend with my antics.
No way, dude. No way. The Penguin bit a dude's nose in public. Beetlejuice may say some creepy shit, but he's never assaulted anybody.
I feel like that's mainly because he's not out in the real world long enough to do that, but agree to disagree.
Beetlejuice is much more charming than the Penguin. The Penguin is like a less charming, grosser version of Beetlejuice. So give me your final thoughts. What are your final thoughts on Batman Returns?
I think that at the end of the day, it is definitely a flawed movie, and I do think that the movie could have benefited if they had reined in Tim Burton just a bit. Not changed too much. I feel like if they had maybe lessened Selina Kyle's role in the movie and maybe saved her for another film and focused more on the Penguin, maybe rewrote a few things, it probably would have worked out a lot better, but I definitely still don't think it deserves nearly as much hate as it gets, and I do think some of the complaints against it are kind of silly, like, yeah, Batman does kill in it, but he killed in the last movie and no one seemed to have an issue with that, and as for it being scary and too violent for kids, did you guys miss the first movie where, among other things, we see the Wayne family get gunned down while Bruce is standing there as a kid? So definitely flawed movie, but definitely doesn't deserve nearly as much hate as it's probably gotten over the years.
So that wraps up this week's edition of Raw. I hope you enjoyed the video. We will get to the mailbag in the next video. So until then, this is Reverend Paul saying, until we meet again.